Welcome and thank you for joining us today for the Strategic Account Management Association's webinar series. My name is Dave Schweizer, Assistant Director of Knowledge and Training here at SAMA, and I'm pleased to be your host. SAMA is a global knowledge sharing, networking, and organization devoted to developing, promoting, and advancing B2B strategic customer supplier value, collaboration, and learning. SAMA's ongoing webinar series is designed to bring you understanding, insights, and fresh ideas on topics that are relevant to strategic account managers and organizations. Today's webinar is Engaging Self and is the first part of a three-part series entitled Strategic Customer Engagement Now. I'm very excited to introduce our speakers today. We have Phil Sterling, who serves as the CEO of the Summit Group, and Shaquille Barnwell, who is a partner and senior VP with the Summit Group. Gentlemen, take it away.
Dave, thank you so much and welcome to everybody. And as Dave said, we hope that you can join us not just for this conversation this morning, but for kind of the trilogy, as I'm calling it, which will be today's session of Engaging Self, next week's session of Engaging the Customer, and then the week after that, we'll be talking about engaging your own company. So please join us for all three so we can have kind of a cohesive dialogue. But again, thanks for joining. Number one, any questions, comments, put them in the chat box. Dave will be monitoring that for us, and we'll stop throughout the conversation to check in on that. So listen, today we're not going to talk business. Today we're going to talk about, as I like to call it, your human operating system. And the thesis that for today's dialogue is maybe three things. And maybe this is the value prop for the three-part series. Number one, as I'm kiddingly saying to people, we can all come out of COVID either fatter or better. All right. And it's, why not come out better? And I'm suggesting that this has been a major kind of pause point for all of us. But the question is, how can we come out of it better as a result of this crisis? That's thought number one. Number two, we'll talk more about this next week, is SAM has never mattered more. As we start to rebuild the economy, strategic account management and strategic selling is kind of the oxygen of the healing of the economy. And we're going to talk more about why SAM has never mattered more. And third, which I think relates most to our conversation today, is I believe that this COVID moment just could be the best opportunity we've ever had in our life to reinvent how we show up in our personal life, in our business life, and as someone said, how you occupy the space that you've been given in life. And that's what we want to talk about today. And I've got with me our Senior Vice President, my dear friend, Shaquille Barnwell, because we've been doing a lot of conversation about that and infusing that in our work. Shaquille, any opening thoughts from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Phil. It's just a pleasure to be here today with all of you. I just have three things to say just to start out with. This whole session, this first of three sessions, is really around a guide to help you unpack your bags, right? We all may have messy suitcases. We haven't been traveling for a while. The idea here is to unpack our bags, to sort through what is in our suitcase, and then start to repack it in a way which allows us to engage with customers by knowing where everything is, knowing what we want to leave in the bag and knowing what we want to draw out to be helpful to our customers. Number two, we want to guide you through a set of tools and practices that will help you shape radical self-inquiry, to help you reflect on yourself and then using a notepad, following a journaling exercise, or mindfulness through reflection, long walks, whatever works for you, is using what we share with you today to guide the self-reflection process, to identify those key pieces of insights about you and yourself and the way you'll engage in the future that'll be helpful for you and allow you to be even more impactful as you go to the next stage of engaging the customer. And I look forward to talking to you.
Any of you who've been with me before know that I'm kind of the anti-guru. Don't trust anybody that tells you how to live your life. My mission statement is to always be more deeply confused about more important things, to wrestle with the big stuff. So we're not going to offer you any answers for this this moment, but we say, let's maybe be more deeply confused around 4 things. Number 1, clarity. How do we bring clarity to chaos? Number 2, managing expectations. Shaquille's going to dive into that. And then we're going to offer you some personal practices and some design thinking tools. This is no time for tips, techniques, and tricks. This is time for wise thinking. And the whole thesis for today's dialogue is this. It's deeply important for you and I to stay grounded as human beings, not just for ourselves, but so we can help others. As we always say, you can't give away what you don't have. And if you're not grounded, how can you help others? So if you've been with me before, you've heard my thesis that when the universe wants our attention, often it'll throw us a pebble. And if that doesn't work, we get thrown a stone. And if that doesn't work, we get thrown a brick. Well, I don't know how to unpack COVID, but I suggest that maybe COVID, great big global brick. And as I describe it, it's the great global humbling. It's been the great leveler. It's touched everyone. We're now living what I call a post-knowing world. There's a lot of anxiety out there, and there's just, as I would describe it, unspeakable and unknowables in front of us. It's a liminal time. In an odd way, we all understand the past. We all believe there's a future coming on the other side of this. In an odd way, there seems to be almost an absence of the present right now. We seem to be in this suspended state. But what I want to suggest today is to use this maybe suspended state to wrestle with the big stuff in life. And one of them might be this. If you've been with me before, I talk about there's 3 types of work. There's hard work, those roles in life when the shoe just didn't fit. There's right work. But most importantly, the question is SAM and strategic account management your life's work? As you look at the rest of your life, the question is this where you want to spend it? And that's a question only you can answer. But maybe today's conversation will help you maybe clarify that. Now, as we dive into this, in the conversation of COVID, there's been a lot of medical discussion around how it's attacked people with pre-existing conditions. But I want to reframe that and maybe look at pre-existing conditions in a different context. I believe we all have these pre-existing conditions in our personal and business life. And without question, what a crisis does, it reveals what has been concealed in many ways. And that can be tough. But I think what this moment has done for all of us is maybe reveal those aspects of our business life and our personal life that maybe we have left unattended. Dr. Jordan Peterson talks about a great quote talks about what's the things that have been ignored in our life. And often turbulence kind of knocks us out of this state of autopilot that we've been on and forces us to step up to those things that we've deferred in our life, whether it's our marriage, our relationships, our family, whatever it might be. But let's look at that as a positive and say, what might be the greatest thing that we've learned during this moment of COVID? And what is it that has been most revealed in my life that maybe now that I can deal with? I think that's one of the great questions from moment. And that brings us into clarity. So Shaquille, maybe you want to chat a little bit about that.
Yeah, so, we're going to do a couple of these put the fish on the table exercises where, if you do have your notebook, just think about this, write this down now, reflect on it after. As you've been living through the last just over 2 months now, what have you learned through your experiences, through your own reflections, through perhaps looking at your blind spots, engaging with your family, working in this new way? What have you learned? And what has been your greatest learning so far? Going forward, the most critical thing you can do and use this time for is identify a few things to focus on that you want to take with you into the next chapter. And identifying what that is really important. Impact and feasibility is an exercise used a lot in business planning. But for you personally, it's critical to major in the majors, focus on the big stuff. And a great way of doing that is understanding of all the things you have in front of you that you need to work on and do. Which of those things will have the greatest impact on you personally and on the people around you? And of those things that have the greatest impact, which of those are the most feasible to accomplish in a short period of time? When you focus on impact and feasibility, you should end up with 1 to 3 things. 1 to 3 major things to focus on. And when you do that, when you focus on those major things, what you'll find is you'll build momentum. You'll develop a sense of confidence. If Phil, you can advance the next slide, you'll develop a sense of confidence and focus, because essentially the brain is wired for clarity. It's why we go through our lives looking for patterns, because our brains want to simplify all the stimuli that comes our way. And we'll all form patterns in different ways depending on our upbringing and the way we look at the world. But what we're looking for is clarity. And when you focus on a few things to work on, to focus on, and you pick those things that have high impact and are feasible, what will happen is you will build positive momentum, you will build success, you will make impact, and that will give you a release of positive brain chemistry, which creates this antidote to anxiety, which creates this natural high, which will actually stimulate a virtuous cycle, where you will then continue to move on, be able to take on even more challenging assignments and tasks, and make an even greater impact. It's a powerful way to use the natural brain's ability to move forward.
Shaquille, I can't tell you how much this has helped me in the last couple of months. Like you and like all of us, you can wake up in the morning and it's been said that the day can come at you like a pack of wild animals.
Yeah.
Okay. And you can be disabled. Where do I start?
Yeah.
And what's helped me so much is to focus on kind of that sphere of influence.
Yeah.
What are the things I can do today are the most impact, and what's possible today? And that has been my source of navigation.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you. So let's talk a minute about clarity and understand how moving forward, it was true before, even more true now, that it's hard to be certain about anything. The days ahead are uncertain. The future is uncertain. And the information coming at us makes us feel that times are ambiguous. So what is really important is to focus on clarity and moderate the certainty, because none of us can be sure. And when you try to be certain about things, you develop a kind of a clinging to a dogma, which doesn't keep our minds open. So if we focus on getting clear, understanding how to figure out what is mattering in a moment, it allows us then to move forward and build a mechanism to be clear at all times. As I said, the world is going to be ambiguous. The world is going to be uncertain. We have to be agile and flexible. And the best way to be agile and flexible is to develop our mechanisms to gain clarity from a given situation. You gain clarity by asking really good questions. You gain clarity by telling each other stories that are communicating the essence of what's important at a particular time. Be the great explainer to your customers. Be the great explainers to yourselves about what really matters, and moderate the desire to have certainty.
One of the things that Shaquille, you know, I've talked about that we've observed as we work across industries right now is, as I said earlier, the great humbling. And what we're finding is clients and your customers have never been more open to input and insights. There has been what I call a reset of receptivity to those suppliers, those people that can bring, again, clarity to chaos, not certainty.
Yeah.
And as Bob Johansen said in his work, the future will reward clarity and it'll punish certainty. And I love his quote, certainty is a cruel imposter right now. Be careful of it. And I've always talked about not being wed to your point of view. It's very easy to get intellectual glaucoma and be wed to how things have been done in the past. But this is no time to cling to the past.
And in fact, you know, if ever we had temptations to have the answers and give the answers, this is time that's proven that that is the wrong approach. In fact, it's not about having the answer. It's about asking powerful questions and asking questions that you and your customers and your company can work together to not just get one answer, but multiple possible answers that work in multiple possible scenarios that might unfold in the future.
You know, there's one other kind of principle that I've learned in life is that clarity matters more than agreement. Often in business, we talk about, well, it's important that we come together and agree. Well, what life has taught me is often we can agree on the wrong things.
Yeah.
And I think I would now shift that concept to say, let's come together and gain clarity, because clarity matters more than agreement often. So principle number one is a focus on clarity over certainty. Dave, let's push the pause button before we move to our second piece, which is on expectations. Any questions, comments coming in, Dave, that we want to talk about before we move forward?
We did have a question come in that I thought might be interesting to bring up. The question is, how do you find the things that are both high impact and feasible? Is there a system or technique for identifying them?
Well, I think I would add a third vector. From a business standpoint, if you're looking at all of the initiatives, projects, opportunities, which would have high impact on my customer, which are feasible, and then the third one is what's most attractive to my company. So this is a business context, but what we want to do is focus on what's good business. So from that standpoint, that's kind of the business side of that. Shaquille, anything you'd offer on the
I mean,
side of that?
let me offer a very, very practical way to approach this. What you do is you draw two columns, and you identify let's say three columns. In the first column, you identify all the things you can do right now, all the actions you can take, all the options available for you to do something right now. And you might align those options against a problem you're trying to solve. And then what you do is for each option, you rate on a scale of 1 to 5. How much impact do I think that this particular option or action will have on my circumstance? And you do that for all of the options. And then you go to the third column, you say, how feasible, how easy to implement is each of these options and actions? And what you'll end up with is you'll end up with 2 points. Those 2 points you can plot in a 2x2 matrix or a graph. And what you should see is those ideas, those actions that have both the highest impact and the highest feasibility should be in the top right corner of your picture. And those are the 2 or 3 things that you want to focus on moving forward in the next little while. I hope that helps.
Dave, any other questions before we move on?
That is the only one that's coming. So, oh, hang on. Somebody just sent one in. Regarding clarity versus certainty, this seems a rejection of truth or fact. Does clarity ultimately illuminate certainty?
Yeah, I think the two are certainly conjoined right now. I think the learnings here are, again, be careful of being wed to your point of view right now. And also, I think there's another wise principle. At the Summit Group, we call it the Platinum Rule. The golden rule is do unto others as you want to have done unto yourself. The Platinum Rule says do unto others as they want to have done unto them. And next week, when we talk about the customer, I'm going to talk about the shift that I've seen in SAM and strategic selling, the shift from business development mindset to business continuity mindset, which is what can my company bring to keep my customer in business right now? I think that's the heart of the matter. And part of our whole dialogue today and how we balance clarity and certainty really folds into a larger question. How do you want to be remembered? And what I mean by that, Dave, is I think it was maybe a month or so ago, I was speaking to an executive at one of our healthcare clients. Listen to what she said. When this is over, she said, we are going to remember those who tried to sell to us versus those who tried to help us. What a beautiful statement. And part of today's dialogue in our three-part series, I think, rotates around a simple question. In a post-COVID world, whenever that might be, how do you want to be remembered? As somebody who was trying to sell or somebody who was trying to help? So I think that maybe gets into this balance of clarity and certainty a little bit. And I think it frames, hopefully, our conversation.
So I want to talk a little bit about energy management, energy conservation, not power. We talk a lot about cash conservation during this time as incomes are being affected. Well, I also want to talk about energy conservations. And one of the things that's proven to be true is the greatest drainer of our energy is when our expectations aren't being met. So I want to strongly suggest you take a practice. Again, journal or do it while you go for a long walk. And try to understand what the people in your business life are expecting. So what is your manager or the senior management of your organization expecting of you? If you don't know and you can't write it down, then you need to ask. The next question, what is your customer expecting of you? Phil just finished talking about how some customers are saying, I don't want to be sold to, I want to be helped. Now that was always true, it's just even more true now. But being clear for an individual customer, they may want a solution or they may not want a solution, but being clear on your customers, what are they expecting of you as a person? And third, and probably the most important, is what do you expect of yourself? And what you yourself are expecting of your company and your customers. Now, having some clarity around those things is really important. And then you look at those things and you say, where are the misalignments, if any? And where there are misalignments, it's critical to communicate. We go through our lives and we feel sometimes heartbroken in our relationships. We feel heartbroken in our day-to-day work. And oftentimes the reason that we're heartbroken and our energy is depleted is because we had expectations of a person or a situation that was violated. We were disappointed. But if we really think and reflect, oftentimes we'll realize that those expectations that we had of a person or situation were never articulated. And so what we're experiencing is this violation of unarticulated expectations. Things that we expect from others in our lives, in our business world, that they had no idea we were expecting, and therefore they let us down. And so don't let that happen here, because it's avoidable. It's avoidable through your self-understanding and self-awareness, and it's avoidable by articulating to the other people in your lives what the expectations are, and seeking from them an explanation of what their expectations from you are. And where there is a misalignment, working to get clarity on how to get over that misalignment. Really critical
Shaquille,
step.
this is probably one of the greatest learnings of my life as I look at it backwards. And the mistakes that I've made around this expectation management, but also expectations of others that they've had of me. I think I shared it with you, Shaquille, back when I bought the Summit Group, I don't know, 12 or 13 years ago.
Yeah.
One of the dearest friends of my life just kind of like cut me out of his life for like 2 years. He wouldn't call me, wouldn't return. I thought, what's gone on here? And what I found out later is that this dear friend had this belief that I should have hired him at the Summit Group. And for 2 years, he went silent on me And finally, through another friend, I found out that that was the heart of the matter. He was angry at me because I hadn't hired him into our firm. But here's the deal. He had never articulated that he was ever interested in it.
Yeah.
And now we've reconciled, but it was such this odd learning, but wonderful learning in
Absolutely.
life.
Absolutely.
You know, coming from the great north here, it's like being put in the penalty box, as we talked about, but no one will tell you what the penalty was for.
Yeah.
Right, Shaquille?
Absolutely. And you can't control the other person, right? Phil, you couldn't have made your friend articulate his expectations to you. We can only control ourselves.
Right.
And the key here is to recognize what our expectation is and have the, I like to say, the vulnerability and courage at the same time to put that expectation out there. People oftentimes aren't candid with their expectations because they're worried about being rejected. And they're worried about being judged. But the consequence of doing that is we have our expectations let down and we hurt our relationship. So going forward, be clear on what you're expecting, be clear on what's expected of you, and articulate where there's a misalignment.
Dave, before we go to our next piece around some personal practices, any questions, comments, or clarifications coming in, Dave, before we move to the next piece of the discussion?
We have had one question come in, and the question is, can you talk more about customers being more open to change now?
Yes, I mean, what we see is there tends to be phases customers are going through right now. The first is, as COVID has hit, is just to resolve some problems in the moment. And a lot of course, companies have been furloughing people, and there's all kinds of this kind of the urgency of the moment. We'll call that the resolve phase. The second phase is to gain some resilience back in their business model. The third is to kind of return their business to cash flow, because cash is the oxygen of your business model. And then finally, after you've kind of resuscitated yourself, is now to say, what's our new business model going forward? For example, we do a great deal of work in the automotive space. So the question is, what's the automotive consumer going to look like going forward? But the point is, number one, think carefully about which customers you want to invest in and divest in. And number two, don't be wed to the past point of view you've had about certain customers, because you are going to find that they're probably so much more open right now for access, insights, because everybody's looking for a roadmap through chaos. I mean, it's just the truth. And any supplier that brings in some of that clarity of what's working in other places, and don't have to solve it, but as SAMs, one of the greatest things we can do is help our customer organize their thinking. And anybody who can do that right now will gain enormous mind share. We call it being the great reductionist, which is taking chaos and complexity and boiling it down to a simple way to understand it, not to solve it, but to frame it. And this is, I think, a new acumen that we want to develop for the times that are ahead of us.
Bill, if I can just add to that question, I think that one of the universal truths right now in the world today, given how quickly organizations had to pivot, change, shift to work from home, and how impressed they are, organizations and customers are with our ability to be agile and flexible. It comes up in every conversation I have. That is a universal truth. I think that everybody in the world has realized how our capacity for flexibility and change and innovation is available to all of us. And we can take advantage of that, because I do agree that customers, organizations are open to change. And we want to build the momentum on top of that new realization we've had about mankind.
So just to punctuate this, the research that we've done has always told us, but now more than ever, customers want to know what's working somewhere else, and especially now.
Yeah.
Let's move to the third section, which is some design thinking. And as I call it, design thinking for the soul. C.S. Lewis said, you don't have a soul, you are a soul. You have a body. I love that. Well, let's talk about how we keep ourselves, again, grounded. These aren't perfect, but let's talk about what's working. The first is to be quiet. As I said, the day can meet you like a pack of wild animals. And what it's so important is to be silent in the morning, in the evening, during the day. If you can just take 5 minutes and just take what I call the 5-minute sabbatical. It's so important right now to reduce the inputs into your life and to be silent, to rest your mind. Number 2 is to be a learner, not a knower. Whoops. And what I mean by this is, remember we talked about not being wed to point of view right now, to be maniacally curious about what's coming. I've often said that the learners are going to inherit the future. The learned are beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. It's back to that wed to the past thing can be enormously dangerous. Third is to use this time. You know, we've all been at a stay at home, depending on what state we're in. Some of us still be in a stay at home. But to use that time, as I said, to come out better. I recently read that during the Great Plague in London, Trinity College was shut down. And during the 4 months that it was shut down, Sir Isaac Newton, who was a student at the time, spent that time and did 3 major things. Number 1, he codified the 3 great laws of motion. Number 2, developed the theory of gravity. And number 3, established the core principles of calculus during that downtime. It's a pretty good redemption of time. So the question is, if we have this new set of time, how are you using it to come out better, as we talked about?
And Phil, if I can pause there for a second, is
Please.
that the idea here is taking these practices not just in the here and now, but taking these practices forward and recognizing that these are the things that will help us survive as we move forward into the new normal.
Exactly. And it goes back to that law of resiliency is, you know, it's not the crisis, it's how we respond to the crisis. And this is a rare moment in all of our lives to have this pause button. And finally, to also take care of ourselves, mentally and physically. It's that, and back to being silent. It's been said that, you know, talking without silence is just noise. And work without rest is a recipe for suffering. Okay. Mm-hmm. And we're all at home right now, and there's no off switch sometimes. So it's important to put boundaries around your life and around your mind right now. So let's talk in the spirit of design thinking. We just want to leave you with maybe some very simple design tools that might be helpful during this time. And we'll close with kind of an action plan. I'm going to talk about relationships, creating a board of directors, and then finally, in the spirit of resiliency, how to focus on what you can do. Shaquille, maybe you want to touch a little bit about taking action.
This is a very, very powerful and simple framework to help you develop clarity on your go forward. You basically ask yourselves a set of questions. What are you doing right now in this new way of working, this environment? And perhaps even what you were doing before this all happened that is working. Things that you are doing that you want to continue doing going forward. Those are things that are working. You want to keep those. What are things that you were doing before or you're doing now that you don't want to continue going forward? I mean, one example of the don't want is myself. I was moving pretty fast. And I wasn't really taking the time to think about what I learned either that day or the week prior. And I want to make sure going forward that I start doing those things. Those are things that I want to keep doing. You also want to know what are the things that you are not doing that you want to do now. And those are the opportunities to improve yourself and improve yourself going forward. And then ultimately the deal breakers. What are those things that you are not doing now and that you never want to do? The things that are not good for your life, not good for your practice, not good for your relationships, the deal breakers. Very helpful way to frame out and develop clarity and focus on things you want to keep doing, things you want to improve, and the things you want to stop doing.
One of our clients said their new definition of strategic planning is 90 days. And I think that's probably not just a good business principle, it's probably a good life principle, is given this liminal future, this foggy future, is to take the future in bite-sized pieces.
Yeah.
And just roughly 3 months, ask yourself these 4 questions, because I think the key is right now is to live a life of purposeful pivoting and make sure, back to our quote of major in the majors, don't major in the minors, that you're not expending energy on the minors right now.
Yeah.
And hopefully this can act as a kind of a pragmatic guidance system. The other one, Shaquille mentioned earlier, around energy management. Now, if you've been with me before, you've probably seen this tool before. I think it's a tool that's never mattered more than right now. Back to using COVID as this pause point, one of the great things to do is take an inventory of your relationships. Now, for those of you who maybe haven't been exposed to this tool before, let me walk you through it very briefly. But I want to be very clear as I go through this. My thesis is simply this. It's so important in life to surround yourself with nutritious relationships, healthy relationships, but not for narcissistic reasons. Why? So you can gain energy to give away to others. Because I think we all agree that we're on the planet to serve other people. But as we said at the beginning of this conversation, you can't give away what you don't have. So I want to be maniacally clear that this is not a tool for judgment or for narcissism. And it's not talking about good and bad people. It's just saying that if you look at your life, there tend to be 4 types of relationships. First are additives. People that for reasons you cannot explain simply bring you more energy. They're spiritual caffeine. After you've talked with them or been with them, you simply feel better and you don't know why. Secondly, there are depleters. Now, as I said earlier, I'm not saying they're bad people. That's not the point. They might be wonderful people. But the point is, for reasons you cannot explain, they suck the energy out of you. They take the gas out of your tank. They're relational sandpaper, if you will. Delete them. Why? Because a depleter for you could be someone else's additive. The third are dividers, the most toxic of all relationships, because they show up as friends, but it's ultimately a transaction that is clothed in a relationship because they want to divide you ultimately from something or somebody. And the highest form of dividers are sociopaths. And one of the great weekend reading books is The Sociopath Next Door. Take a look at it. It talks about the 10 characteristics of sociopathic behavior, because roughly 4 to 5% of global population is sociopathic. And finally, our multipliers. People who simply open up the mindset of your life. They open you up to new thinking. They broaden the aperture of how you see life and how you think about things. They simply make your life larger. So the purpose of all this is to say this. As I live life, I now know that I want fewer and deeper relationships as opposed to many and shallow. And one of the challenges of social media is it can make us wide but not deep. And as we go through life and we go through COVID and the new foggy future, it's important to surround yourself with people who are additives, because if we spend too much of our life in the lower right quadrant, then we can't be an additive for someone else.
Yeah.
The other tool I overlay is probably one of the most valuable tools of my life, is to have a personal board of directors. People in your life that when you're struggling, when you're trying to make a difficult decision, will tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And what I look for on my board of directors are people that have been through difficult things, because I'm seeking wisdom, not intelligence. And also, I look for people who've been through difficult things, because it's those people that have been broken, those people that have been through adversity, that is what creates wisdom. And that's what I seek when I look to my board of directors. Shaquille, you and I have had this tool in our life for years.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And I think we've been that for each other. The other thing I just add here, Phil, is that there is also a role for coaching relationships here. Mm-hmm. Is entering relationships with either official executive coaches or people in your life that play that coaching role, but understand the process of how helping you get clarity, develop a plan, and hold you accountable, holding a mirror up to yourself. This is a great way to focus relationships on people that actually help you move forward.
As part of this is my obsession with wisdom. And I just offer you now more than ever in life is to seek not smart people, but wise people. And we talked earlier about separating those who say they know from those who are being curious. If someone tells you that they know something right now, run away quickly, because people are, we don't know much of anything right now. Also, people seek those who are curious, not needing to be right. Remember, we talked about being wed to point of view. Here's a big one. People who are discerning, not distracting. There's a lot of misinformation out there right now, and it's just so important to be able to discern what's truthful and what is a half-truth. And seek people who are trying to broaden their perspective, not being calcified in their perspective, not narrowing it. This matters deeply, and I think it's a great opportunity to reassess relationships. And ironically, COVID, I think we've all probably seen some interesting manifestations of relationships during the COVID times in our family system, in our friend system, in our business set of relationships. It's been an interesting time of clarification. Any thoughts on that, Shaquille, before we wrap up?
No, I think that's absolutely right. Nothing else to add to that.
So Dave, before we close with kind of the final tool, we've covered a lot. Any questions, comments, anything coming in, Dave, that we want to touch on before we close?
We do have a few questions that have come in. The first one is, what are the key questions that we should be asking our customers post-COVID?
Great question.
Question number one, what are your biggest issues right now to maintain business continuity? Right now, again, they have no time for anything other than what matters to keep their business model afloat. Number two, how do they believe that their consumer, their end customer, may be changing? See if they've got their eye on the end customer, because right now that's the greatest source of navigation. And then I think the third key question is, what aspects of their business model do they believe that they're going to have to explore and potentially shift to stay relevant in the post-COVID world? But I think the first one is the most important. And next week on our webinar, we're going to talk about this new world of business alignment. Because right now, I think the new definition of strategic account management is this: aligning the assets and capabilities of your company to the highest issues and needs of your customer's business model. What can your company bring to keep your customer afloat right now? Anything to add, Shaquille?
Yeah, one other question I would ask. Those are really three great questions, all focused on how your customers' needs are changing. Are excellent. One other question you might ask your customer is, what have you learned that your organization is good at that you didn't know it was? And a related question is, what have you learned that your organization is not good at? And again, back to the clarifying. The power of clarifying is helping your customer come to a realization of what they've learned about their organization and come to a realization about what they know they're not good at. And in the answer to that question, you may see the opening to how you can be helpful.
Dave, any other questions? That was a great one.
We do actually have two more, but they're kind of related, so I'll ask them both. The first is, what are the areas where we should focus our learning? Do you have any insights on the skills and knowledge that will be most useful in the future? And the second is, how do you know what the majors are versus the minors?
Wow, that's a big one. Let me just take a piece of that. I think the first part is, what should we be focused on? I would coach you right now is to understand how you learn. I know that's kind of a strange answer, but it's getting a deep understanding of how you learn the next thing. I'm not saying this very well, but call it your learn ability, learn-ability. We all learn in different ways. What's important now is not what we know, it's how we learn. And so I would say one of the great things to focus on is to have a deep and intimate understanding of how you learn and curate that deeply, because it's going to be necessary in the future to be a perpetual learner.
Bill, if I could just jump in there, I mean, I couldn't agree more. That is probably the most important thing you could be focused on right now, is that whole focus on understanding how you learn. And I just want to offer a bit of a tip or a place to search for people that are not sure what we mean by that, is if you take the term virtuous cycle of learning. That's virtuous cycle of learning. You can search that up on the internet. There's incredible insights on how to structure a learning path that works for you, is flexible, and demonstrates lots of examples of how it demonstrates. There's a tremendous professor who is a specialist in this area. I won't complicate my information with giving you all the different names, but search virtuous cycles of learning. Incredible source of insights.
Dave, I'll take just a stab at the second piece of that question, because I think it'll be a nice bridge to next week when we talk about the customer. Remember, I talked about the next body of work in SAM has to do with business alignment, aligning your company to your customer's business model. And under that alignment, I think there's 3 new acumens that we'll talk about next week. One is to be the great listener, but to listen without solving. Because the minute you start to solve, you quit listening. And also, I've said there's a difference between listening and paying attention. Listening is listening for what the customer is telling you. Paying attention is listening for what they're not saying that maybe they should be. In other words, listening for blind spots. I hope that makes sense. So number 1 is to be the great listener. Number 2, Shaquille mentioned earlier, to be the great explainer. To be able to take complexity and explain it in understandable ways, not dummy it down, but to bring clarity to complexity. And then 3rd is to be the great reductionist, to take complexity and chaos, not solve it, but boil it down to something that's understandable and be able to frame it. The great listener, the great explainer, the great reductionist. So as we close,
I think there was one more question, Phil, which is around how to know what's major and what's not major.
I'll let you go with that one, Shaquille.
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult question, and maybe just one place to start is to it's really around what matters. What are the things that actually will make a difference? And what are the things that you actually can do now? And that leads perfectly to what Phil is talking about here, which is the action funnel. So a great way to focus on the majors is figure out what you what makes an impact and what you can do. And I'll turn it over to Phil now to kind of give you a framework of thinking about that.
And again, if you spent any time with us, you've seen this tool before. It comes from our partner, Dr. Paul Stoltz, Peak Learning. It's a tool that he developed literally decades ago. It's a tool that's never mattered more than right now. And it's called the Action Funnel. And it's really taking resiliency thinking and boiling it down into a simple, pragmatic tool. So here's the pragmatic test I'll give you as we close our conversation today. Right now, today, which is what, May 19th, what's the biggest challenge you face in your personal life today, given all of the challenges that COVID has brought to us on the personal side of your life? And maybe it's that thing that has been revealed, as we talked about earlier. Question number 2, what's the biggest challenge or adversity in your business life, in your career? So just think of those 2 bullet points. There might be 20 of them, but my question is, what's the greatest adversities in your business and personal life? And then what the action funnel says is metaphorically, pour them in the top of your mind and ask yourself 4 clarifying questions. So let's take that greatest challenge in your personal life just as an example. Question number 1, what can't you control? Wisdom begins with understanding what you can impact and what you can't control. So given this adversity, whatever it might be, relational, health, financial, whatever, what can't you control? Let go of that, because there is nothing more toxic than spending mental energy on that which you cannot control. It's disabling to the highest order. Second question is, what could you do to impact the situation? Now notice I didn't say the word solve. There is a dramatic difference between solving and impacting. I've been a solveaholic in my early life. That didn't go so well. Now I know that there's very little in life that I can solve, but there's virtually nothing in life that I can't at least impact for the better. So the difference between those 2 words are unspeakable. What could you do to impact the situation for the better? Third is the most important. How can I be better by going through this adversity? We'll call it the question of COVID. How can we come out of COVID better as a result of it and learn from it? But also, given this adversity you're facing, how can you come out better because of going through the adversity? That's the heart of resiliency thinking, is improving as a result of going through the tough stuff. And then finally, what is one thing that you can do right now? Remember, not solve, but one thing to impact. And as Dr. Martin Seligman said back in the 1960s, in the genesis of the whole body of resiliency thinking, he talked about, it doesn't even matter if what you do succeeds, what matters is doing something, because it takes you out of that state of learned helplessness, and it reverses the physiology of helplessness. Tool that's been around for decades, it's never mattered more than right now. It's helped me get through these days and months, and I'll leave you with making it even simpler. Every morning when you get up, what can't you control? What could you do today to impact things for the better? How can you get better and learn from the tough stuff? And what can you do right now? Resiliency built into a simple tool. Therapists charge you $250 an hour. You can get it for free. So I hope that's helpful to you. And then I leave you with this. Remember we talked about redeeming time? I'm a voracious reader. And I think there's some great books, and these are the 5 that I'm recommending right now. And read important things right now. It's a great time to fortify the mind and to fortify the soul. So I'll leave you with these 5 books. So Dave, it's coming up on the hour. Any other questions you're getting or anything? We've covered a lot of ground, and hopefully we've maybe gotten people to be thinking about the right stuff. Dave, anything coming in?
We do actually have a couple of interesting questions that I wanted to bring up. The first is, how do you respectfully delete a depleter in your life? What is the right way to get out of that relationship?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Part of it is on social media, don't respond. I don't mean that in a snarky or mean way. I mean it just in the opposite way. Because again, this is about narcissism. This is about pragmatism. If there are people, toxic people in your life, sucking energy, then you are not being an additive, and shame on you. So, Shaquille, any good counsel on graceful exits? How's that, Shaquille?
Yeah,
Graceful.
it honestly comes down to candor. There's a phrase that I picked up over the last little while from having teenage kids. It's the term ghosting. Oftentimes people, when they don't want to engage with somebody, will just stop responding, or they will, not answer an email. That is not the courageous way. The courageous way is to be candid. And the courageous way is to express to the people in your lives that either you've changed or some aspect of the relationship doesn't work. And you'll find that when you lean into the vulnerability and the fear of doing that, you'll be surprised what comes out in the other end. You might be actually giving that other person the greatest gift you could ever give them. By being candid, by being helpful, by expressing your expectation, you might turn the relationship around, but if not, you've given that person a gift that they can move forward. Now, it's up to them to choose whether they receive the gift or not, but you've done your part by giving to them. And so I don't believe in ghosting. I believe in being frank and honest and being clear when you need to exit a relationship.
Here in Minnesota, we have a term called Minnesota nice, which often means you never tell the person what you mean, you just tell everybody else.
Yeah.
That's not nice. And often being nice isn't nice. The other thing I found during this time of COVID, and Shaquille, I don't know if you've been, is I have been gravitating to the people in my life that are helpful to me. And again, not in a narcissistic way, but you can kind of look at your relationships and just ask, are they helpful? So I can be helpful to others. Hope that makes sense. Dave, what else do you have?
Well, first, we've had a couple of requests to bring the book list back up. So if you wouldn't mind scrolling back to that slide.
There we
And
go.
folks, we'll be sending out the recording of this as well, so you'll have all these in the recording. And then we have actually one more question, which I think is an interesting one to end on, since we only have a couple of minutes. And that question is, how does the phrase, "no man is an island," speak to you today?
I'll just say it in a couple sentences. I think one of the great reveals of COVID is that no one can be okay if we're not all okay. It's just that simple. I think we've understood the interrelatedness, both in business and in life, of the collector grander good. And I think that is probably one of the greatest gifts that COVID has offered to me and to us. Shaquille?
Yeah, I think it's such a great question to end on. A gentleman I followed, his name is His Highness the Aga Khan, had a very powerful phrase that he gave at a ceremony that he was receiving an award. And we've come to learn it's true over the last several years, and especially now. And the quote is this: "Instability is infectious, but so is hope." And so what we've experienced is this idea that when something is wrong with somebody else or another part of the world, there is no way to keep it from us. It will impact us. And in the same way, when things are positive, things are hopeful, when we have optimism and a way forward, that also is infectious. And recognizing both those things means that there is no way we can live on an island. It'll hurt us to live on an island if we aren't connected to others.
Well, I hope this has been helpful. This is a nice preamble to our 3-piece Netflix series here. And, I think hopefully this dialogue of personal operating system now will snap right into next week now when we talk about how we show up to the customer, and then the week after how we show up to our own company. So Dave and Sama, thank you.
Thank you.
For those who have been with us, I hope we've helped you. Take care. God bless.
So Shaquille, thank you very much for
you.
the presentation. It was fantastic, and we appreciate you sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. Also, just want to say a quick thank you to the audience for taking the time out of your busy day for this. We hope you enjoyed the presentation and are leaving with some valuable takeaways. And we're looking forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you all very much and have a great day.